not an urban person. My hometown is a small village in a lagoon, and I never lived really in a city, in a big town. And I lived in the Western Alps. I lived in a small village in the south of Italy, in the Appennino Meridionale. And now I'm returning to my hometown in the lagoon. And these several places have few things in common. And I noted them down yesterday night, because it's very hard to define, as you know, what is urban and what is not urban. What is a city, ce qui est la ville, ce qui est pas la ville. So the list includes the places I live are too far from large metropolitan areas to be commuters. They don't have smart city facilities. Il n'y a pas de trottinette. We don't have high-speed trains. Usually, we just don't have trains. There's no train station at all. No high-speed internet. Stable or declining population caused by waves and waves of migration, people going abroad or to big cities. So I will say more on this later, but this is my two, let's say, disclaimers. Disclaimer number one, I'm trying to flip the perspective here, so trying to talk about urban issues from a non-urban point of view. And when I will propose you a little bit of focus on Italy, on the situation in Italy, I will assume my point of view from the villages. You know? So I'm considering the pandemics from the point of view of the villages. This showed us something very interesting. The data showed that the smaller cities reacted much better to the economic crisis compared with the larger cities. And so the data, the data for those years, from 2000 to 2011, for example, showed that in several countries, this is just an example, second-tier, smaller cities had higher share of GDP growth compared with capital cities. So, we have smaller cities. This is interesting. They react better. We've been studying for decades the big international cities, the big capitals, and finally smaller cities appear in the picture, and we have opportunity to study them. And for example, ESPON, that probably you know, if you're not familiar with ESPON, European Spatial Planning Observation Network, that's a super interesting source of information and research on territorial research in Europe. They stated that the presence of a second tier or medium-sized city was positively associated to a better resilience of the region. So this was a great discovery. So many started studying the smaller cities in different parts of the world. I did myself, my little humbly and modestly, and so we did. I wrote there and just quickly commenting a few interesting issues that emerged studying the smaller cities. For example, I just put there three among many research questions on the difference between smaller cities and big cities as to their economy. And question number one was: do smaller city lack skilled and educated workers? Maybe, but eventually many smaller cities have university, have a college, or have healthcare facilities. When you have university and healthcare facilities, you also have a very stable economic base for the city. This maybe it's more a North American thing, but if you think of many smaller cities in Europe, this is the case. Second, question number two, smaller cities, do they lack professional resources and experience in strategic planning? That's what we do. Huh? And maybe, but there's a lot of networks they can participate in, from Euro cities to any else. anyone else. And you have a smaller size and ability to develop better the social capital, to develop and reproduce better social capital. And question number 3, do smaller cities lack agglomeration economics because of the size? Of course they do, but they can exploit the advances in telecommunication and transportation, and this is very, very on the spot right now. And they can borrow size. This is an interesting effect. If you have a big metropolitan area, a big metropolitan city close to you, you have good connections, you can borrow some of its functions and for some of the size. Okay, it's just like when I go, well, I don't fly on a plane, but eventually if I would fly on a plane, just as if I go to Venice to get a plane, and as you know, Venice has connections with all over the world. I'm borrowing the airport of Venice, even if I live in the small village in the other side of the lagoon. Is the situation now for the impact of COVID, and this is into a. This goes into a conversation I'm having with myself and you, that is connected with the problem of size, but also is related to the few ongoing sources we have now for studying what is happening in cities with the impact of the pandemic. And so there's a few literature that is ongoing, and there's a lot of observation. So I declare this comes from a lot of personal observation here. So vulnerability, less skilled jobs are being the most vulnerable in general in cities and outside cities, and seasonal jobs especially. And if you consider for example, cities that have a big tourism and sector industry, so all the people workers that are employed in restaurants, bars, etc., they have been very vulnerable. Plus the cultural industries. Cultural industries have been very vulnerable. Some went online. Some are starting again, sort of the kind of hybrid situation you see many, for example, in the film festivals. But then you have all the small businesses that are services for the cultural industries, and they had very long stop. And we will see which will be able to recover after that. ICTs and all the trends we already saw related with the implementation of ICT in cities, the smart cities thing. That in my when I see them, I consider a very big, large and wide set of different things that include the sharing economy, online education, co-working, stuff like that. After the effect of the pandemic, they will, I think they will receive more support, both from the private and the public sector. For example, what I'm observing right now is that citizens are accepting better the digitalization in general of services. Now they are happy. They don't have to go to some office to get the services. More power to public sector, and this is a long trend I've been observing. In my country, it started well before the terrorism, September 11. In my country, it started in 2001 in Genova, and there's sort of a growing acceptance of being more controlled, renounced to privacy in order to be safe. And plus a lot of, as you know, a lot of facilities in the cities we didn't used to have, but now we have. gateways, paths, predefined in order to check the temperature, etc. So this is changing a lot. The last 2 points over there are somehow related both with the topic of housing and the topic of remote work. And I would say that to state it very simple, in a very simple way, the rich and the poor had a very different experience of the pandemic, and they will suffer from different long run consequences. Some could choose if they wanted to work remotely or not, and some could not. Or some could choose to relocate to their second homes in the countryside, and some could not. And some people could experience the confinement in a very big, nice apartment in the city, and some were overpacked in a small apartment with children doing homeschooling and parents trying to work remotely. So this has, I see that this is having a big consequence. And I add here, people living in the city and people not living in the city had a very completely different experience of the impact of the pandemic. Fine. Last point, transportation. We use the car more than we did before. Many people does, because they feel safer. That's the commuter trains. In my country, commuter trains were immediately seen as one of the places where the COVID spread, definitely more than any other area. So in Lombardia, you might remember the very beginning of the pandemic, the area of Milan was tremendously affected, and one of the first media effects were, this is because of the commuter trains. So again, more car mobility means less use of or less demand of public transportation, maybe some financial deficit, who knows. And but again, commuting by car is reserved to a certain part of workers, but not to everybody. And all the other individual transport systems that are developing in the city instead of mass transport, just like the trottinette, they work for the inner city. They work in the small neighborhood. They work in the 15-minute city, the concept of 15-minute city, but they don't work if you're a commuter. If you commute from the banlieue, from the periphery, you just can't use them. And so, or you can use them only partially for the very last mile you're doing. So this is, I see a sort of a bifurcation, the gap ongoing with these different stories. And these are saying what will happen now. And on the right side, I left that in Italian because I thought that you can read much of it. No? A few headlines from the newspapers. And the first prediction was people will leave the big cities and move to rural areas after the shock or during the pandemic shock. And then urban areas will benefit a lot from that. An instant book, Flee from the City, Milano, half people in Milan, the future of the cities and the flee to the small towns. Archistars like Boeri predicted the flee from cities, etc. But as a matter of fact, this is not happening. This data show that this is not happening. I will show you an example of data in this respect. And one of the reasons is there is a big uncertainty on the stabilization of this distant working possibility. This is not clear. the government is not clear, and some big companies, they already planned the future, but many they didn't. And we live in a system with a lot of small and medium businesses. This is a fact. It's not so easy to change completely a paradigm. And as a matter of fact, this is a data that is very interesting to me. And it's a comparison between October 2019 and October 2020. So right before and right after the first confinement. And these are municipalities, small municipalities from 35,000 to 65,000 and from 5,000 to 15,000 residents that experienced an interesting, unusual growth of resident population as a consequence of change of residents. So this is not natural. It's not born less death, but it's new residents, less outgoing residents. And so you may say, wow, a lot of municipalities that grew a lot with many people, but then I suggest you to, if you want, to look the few highlighted that are more or less half of the first 10 municipalities in this ranking, and they are all in the big metropolitan area of a big city, but not just any big city. They are all in the big metropolitan area of Milan. So what actually happened, that people that were living in the first periphery, first banlieue of Milan, they moved in a town just outside the city. So we have new commuters that will drive the car every day, probably, and this is not really the effect that was predicted, no? The effect that the small towns in the countryside are repopulated by people living in the city. Prediction number 2. Real estate values in big city, and city cores especially, will fall. And this is even worse, because the data we have shows that in Milan, in 2020, plus 5.2% average price of immeuble, residential apartments. It takes more than 12 years of salary to buy a small, medium apartment in Milan. Average apartment, average salary, of course. And so this is big. Huh? And cities with more than 50,000 residents experienced a growth in real estate value, in the cost of apartments, and smaller cities or a reduction or a stagnation. And then you have this divided city, this divided country that is becoming even more divided. You spend more than 4,000 euros per square meter average in Milan, and you spend 700 in small cities like Caltanissetta in the south and Biella in the north. I picked 2 cities, one in the south, one in the north, to overcome the idea that there is the poor south and the rich north. This is not the case. It's not always the case. And as to this real estate effect, the problem is you are in Milan or you're not. Okay. Lower left corner, this is me. Okay. Alessio and Alexine in Valle d'Ost. Come yeah, the Vascia. This is Oppido Lucano in the south. So this is a completely misrepresentation of the situation. And so am I saying that there is that the small towns or the non-urban areas where I live are not studied or neglected? I'm not really saying this. I'm saying that there's something different, that very, very subtle, that I understood during the confinement. Usually, the non-urban areas are studied by people that were educated, live and work in the city. So I have people from the cities arriving from the big university in the big city in Milan that come down to my village, and they study me and they tell us what we are supposed to do and what we should do. And in fact, as a matter of fact, the non-urban territories, if you consider them, I'm sure that's the case in French too, they are defined with privative adjectives. We are peripheral, marginal, remote, isolated. Second, as professionals, let's try to hear the voice and collect the voices from the peripheries, because they need to be heard. And in order to do that, personally, I'm trying to use as much as possible terrain, of course, but you already know that, and mixed methodology. So I'm going out and working with people from the creative sectors, from the arts, from people that usually are filmmakers or photographers, etc. And then I work with the architects, of course, historians, anthropologists, etc. So I try to really overcome this big problem we have of disciplines that need to be overcome. And so I'm learning that in this mixed idea, way of working both on the terrain, listening a lot to the voices, and maybe eventually having somebody from the peripheries to put forward the issue. Maybe it could work a little bit and put a little bit of equilibrium in the situation. I'm concluding right now. I'm very worried because in my country, the three big initiatives of the recovery plan so far have been incentives for regenerating buildings. And you have construction works going on everywhere in Milan. And in my village, you can't find anybody who is able to do what is needed in order to get the incentives. E-bikes and trottinettes, we don't need that. So, of course, they are useful in Milan, city core, but we don't need that. And high-speed train. So I'm very worried of what is happening, and I really thank you very much for listening to me so far, and here a little bit of links to be in touch, because this is just a discussion. This is not a statement, of course. Merci.
This was the end of your intervention. Thank you for your point of view and your interrogation in a special way from your point of view, non-urban citizen. Thank you.